everyone, and welcome to the December version of our Legislative Action Committee. I'm Lisa Chapman with Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, and I'm joined by several of my colleagues. We're so glad to have you here today, and I really appreciate you either ripping yourself away from all the catch up from the long weekend or ordering online for Cyber Monday. So either way, we're happy to have you with us. We have a jam-packed agenda today, so we will go ahead and get started. And folks, you can continue to introduce yourselves. As we look at our agenda on the next slide, I just want to let you know that if you would please, if you have questions, please post them in the chat, or you can raise your hand. We have a speaker this morning or this afternoon, and we will not take questions during the time that she's speaking.
Courtney is speaking.
But we will be happy to take questions after she's done. And so our first speaker today is Courtney Myers-Keaton, who's the Executive Director of the Grand Rapids Area Continuum of Care. And she started presenting with us earlier, and she actually was rudely interrupted. So we are so pleased to have her back here today. And you will hear some exciting things about what they're doing with their 100 in 100 campaign. We also are going to have federal updates from Eric. I will run through some state updates along with Ashley Heidenrich, one of our staff. We'll also tell you a little bit about what Micah's been up to and what we plan for this month, and then, you know, early into next year. And then we want to hear from you. So a lot to cover today, and we're really super glad that you are here with us. So without further ado, let me turn to Courtney.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me back, and fingers crossed that we don't have the same issues as last time. Thanks, Lisa, for bringing me. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our 100 in 100 campaign. I know that I was able to give a brief introduction before, but really it is focusing on how do we collaboratively address homelessness through public-private partnerships. So I think you can go to the next slide. And then now the next slide. You can see the different partners that we have involved include a lot of our service providers, the county government, city of Grand Rapids, some private investors, along with private philanthropy, and our Grand Rapids Chamber of Commerce. So to just kind of give a little context of how this came to be is if you go to the next slide, you know, we know that there's lots of articles. We all work in this space where homelessness has become a forefront issue in a lot of communities, politically, socially, and sometimes they can be really challenging conversations to have with each other. And we actually started having this conversation, gosh, I want to say it was 2021, when we joined the Built for Zero movement, which is a national organization, Community Solutions. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. Many communities have signed on, and we became a cohort in 2021. So if you go to the next slide. This was really focused on ending chronic homelessness in Grand Rapids in particular. We had reached ending veterans homelessness back in 2018, and we were recognized for that. But this was giving us some new tools, some one-on-one coaching and technical assistance, along with the ability to really navigate some of the strategies that other communities have utilized to focus on chronic homelessness instead, because we know that one of the things that with veterans population we saw was an influx of federal resources, which we aren't necessarily seeing the same for those who are experiencing chronic homelessness at this time. But we know that they are a growing population in many communities. They also tend to have complex care needs and a need for supportive services. So rapid rehousing and our other traditional forms of housing with our ESG or even most of our COC program funds aren't going to necessarily solve for the entire population. Even if we do have some permanent supportive housing, it tends to be rather limited, and the turnover rate is pretty low as well. So in joining Built for Zero, we attend multiple sessions a year and usually one in-person session a year to meet with other communities and also really get some one-on-one time as a planning group to talk about what are our strategies, where have we come to this point, which for us, the first couple of years was really building out a solid by name list. And I know that 18 months sounds like a long time to be working on building out a by name list, but it was really perfecting the reporting that we developed, making sure that we had the policies in place for case conferencing, and we brought in folks so that we could do some mapping and really look at what is working across the system. So talking with our street outreach providers all the way to our housing providers and people experiencing homelessness to make sure that we were identifying the gaps, figuring out where our low hanging fruit was, and then developing our strategies based off of that. So at one of our learning sessions, we kind of got it into our heads that housing 100 folks in 100 days is something that we really wanted to focus on. Sounds great, but you can't just build out a list of 100 folks without having resources to accompany it. So it did take us, I would say, a good year before we were able to identify resources. And the way that that happened was really working with some of our local foundations. So we have the DeVos Family Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce, the Grand Rapids Housing Commission has played a huge role in this, and our county government. We all went and we visited Houston and we learned a lot about what they have done over this past several years. Obviously, their landscape looks a little bit different, but it was really more what did their partnerships with each other and their relationships with each other look like in order to really reduce their unsheltered homelessness population. And so when we came back, we saw that we had a lot of the same foundational building blocks that we could ourselves mirror and really structure something around that. So if you go to the next slide, we end up really just having a group of people that were really excited about the opportunity and wanted to see it move forward. And so we said that we were all in, all of the partners around the table. We meet on a weekly basis, and we actually were able to talk with our housing commission, and they had already agreed to do this before, but they have vouchers that they are using for homeless preference now. And so that really increased the number of vouchers that we thought we could use for our particularly our chronically homeless population, but we knew we couldn't do it without case management support. So we started talking with some of our community members, local leadership at the county, and they were able to identify funding to fund 4 case managers to work specifically on this project over the next 2 years. We also were able to identify funding to put into a flexible pool of funding to be able to set aside for potential damages, security deposits, whatever we might need in order to be able to quickly house someone. If we move to the next slide. And so really our meetings have been about using that resource map or that project map that we developed and strategizing around what we found to be some of our biggest gaps. So we found that quickly moving people in is a challenge. So our case conferencing meetings really focus on, we're not making referrals at the case conferencing meetings. What we're doing instead is we are talking with our outreach providers, our service providers, and we're looking at who's likely to be prioritized for a housing resource over the next couple of months. And what are some of the things that we can help them with in order to move along quicker in the process? So getting the documentation, if we're able to do that, we can start that process, developing the housing plan, even getting them connected with medical care. Maybe they don't have a primary care physician yet. So one of our partners is actually Catherine's Care Center, and they have been really critical in making sure that we're connecting all these folks with a doctor and getting their medical needs met up front even before we get to the point of housing. We can go to the next slide. So really, we have some specific goals and anticipated outcomes. We want to reduce the length of time on the by name list, reduce recidivism, increase exits to permanent stable housing, and increase the availability of resources. So increasing the availability of resources, whether it's housing or other types of resources that we can connect some of these folks to help them stabilize. And then I already talked a lot about that project map exercise in which we were able to identify our gaps and our needs and also our strengths. And then we're testing the following strategies. So utilizing HCVs with a homeless preference and pairing that with solid case management, which includes having stronger case management coordination amongst our agencies, having systemic landlord engagement. So we've had some folks from the chamber who've been working with landlords who are willing to sign an MOU and set aside some of their units for these individuals. And then having that flexible pool of funding to really assure our landlords that that damages will be covered up to a certain extent within the first 2 years of the project. And that also, if there are other needs that we find come about as a result of somebody needing to be housed, maybe there's a system barrier, we're able to pay for that as well. Move on to the next slide, please. So this is just showing you what our planning team looks like. You can see that we have a multitude of agencies and sectors represented here. Catherine's Care Center, Pine Rest, Meltrotter Ministries, Degage Ministries, those are shelter providers in our community. The Grand Rapids Housing Commission, our staff, Dwelling Place, which is a PSH provider, and the Chamber of Commerce, as well as some consultants that have also been assisting with the process. We can move on to the next slide. This just shows you how we as a team divided up our responsibilities. So as I mentioned before, we meet weekly to discuss where we're at and what still needs to happen. So we started this in September, was really our launch date with the goal of wrapping up in the next couple of weeks. And you can see that these were all the things that we've been working on through this time and we'll continue to work on, because our goal isn't to just house 100 folks in 100 days. It's to learn from this process and figure out how do we apply this system wide. And I think that there is definitely a lot that we have learned. So we've learned a lot about the case management needs. There's still like contractual agreements and workflows that we're navigating as well. Pre-housing case management to stabilization, like what does that transfer look like? So these are all things that we've been working on. We have lightly referred to this as we're building this plane as we fly it, which has been pretty true, with the goal that we are stabilizing, helping people to stabilize in housing, preventing them from returning, and then we'll be able to apply this across the system as we move forward. Move on to the next slide, please. This just gives you a sense of, so this is not how referrals are made for the record. This is actually just how people tend to flow through the system with the 100 and 100 list. This is a very high level overview. And I think there are probably a couple of things that may have to be changed since this was last sent out or developed. So the way that we develop our reporting tool is there's a self-report length of time and a disability in an HMIS entry. So that can either be, so when we say validation, we mean reasonably validated. We are not confirming, we're not collecting documentation at this point. What it means is like either they're validated because we have the HMIS documentation, or the individuals within case conferencing can reasonably validate that, like, yes, we've been seeing these folks in our community for this period of time, but we aren't asking people to provide documentation of homelessness at that point. So if they are validated, they are added to the actual by name list. If they are unvalidated, we actually have people in our case conferencing who agree to have further conversations with those households to determine if they should be added to the by name list. So are they meeting that length of time? Because we don't want somebody to be added to this by name list and have to be kicked off due to ineligibility. So we try to have those conversations up front as much as possible and in case conferencing. In case conferencing, we start working on documentation, vital docs, homelessness history, disability, maintaining contact and connection, discussing their housing needs and wants, and developing a housing plan. When there is an opening, the opening is made to our coordinated entry program manager, and then referrals go out based off of our prioritization policy. And they'll either be referred to a site-based PSH, scattered site, or to an HCB. With PSH, if it's scattered site or site-based, they are usually already going to have case management that accompanies it. So a lot of the case management that has been outside the traditional PSH model, they're working primarily with the Grand Rapids Housing Commission HCV recipients, though some of them are working with our dwelling place PSH units as well. And then the housing provider goes through their usual process, determining eligibility, collecting the documentation. Ideally, we would have as much of that as possible. And then they are issued a voucher or assigned a unit and go through the process of move-in. We've also been collecting a lot of donations so that we can have furniture and whatever other household items they might need ready to go once they move in. Next slide. So a lot of this work, like I said, has been really just high level coordination, also getting through the weeds, figuring out what's working, what's not as we're moving along. Right now, and this is as of last week, I need to get an updated count. We've housed 35 individuals with 54 in process. So we haven't met that 100 yet. We do have 54 in process, and we've talked about there's a strong likelihood that the remainder will end up being housed at the beginning of January instead, just due to the timing and also the length of time that that has taken to get some of our background checks back for the Housing Commission, or just the length of time it can take for somebody to get the rest of their paperwork in when we're waiting on applications. So those are all things that sometimes hold up the process, and that we're really trying to work as far as we can ahead of time to reduce the length of time that they are on our by name list and get them housed as quickly as possible. So what we will be doing next is we will be going through an evaluation, and then through that evaluation, learn how we can scale up. So determine what strategies will we want to employ to scale this to our entire system moving forward, and what steps will we need to take in order to do that. So this has been a big learning process. I think that what's been really successful in my eyes is that I've never seen this level of collaboration and coordination amongst partners who don't even necessarily work in this field. So when I'm talking about partners from our local foundations or the Chamber of Commerce that have really stepped up and have been putting this out there, that we need resources, that we need more boots on the ground, that we have to have funding set aside for case management, and they're willing to advocate for it and also spend a few hours a week of their own time of their job to help this happen, which I think that has been what I found to be critically important, that in order for us to move forward with projects like these, it means that it has to be everyone's in and all hands on deck, because we can't rely on solely our COC staff or our coordinated entry lead staff to do all of the work, that it really is a community effort. And when we have willing and committed partners that are at the table, we're capable of doing this work well. And you can move on to the next slide. I think that's pretty much wraps it up. So that kind of just gives you that high level overview. We'll be coming out with some of our lessons learned and what we plan on doing next with it over the next couple of months, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Courtney. This is so exciting for me, and I'm sure for all of us, to hear about, just the impressive amount of planning and collaboration and coordination that this took to get, more than 80 people in process and almost housed. So looking forward to hearing, lessons learned and kind of things that you employ now in your coordinated entry from, scaling up this whole effort. So thank you. And I don't know if I see anything in chat, but we will share out the slides with folks. And hopefully you can, present at a conference or something again after this is all done and you've done your evaluation, because really interested to hear what you all think, after the fact.
Good thing. Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks so much. Really great effort. Thanks, Courtney. And so now we are going to go to Eric Huffnagel, our CEO, and hear about some federal updates. Eric.
Hello, everyone. I hope that you are doing well. Thank you, Courtney, again for that great presentation. second time was a charm. Thank you for coming back and plugging through it. So let's get the slides up. I'm going to be talking about some of the federal work once the slides do pop up. But we're starting off with a conversation about the budget. And I wanted to make sure that we are all aware of the fact that the fiscal year 25 budget is still in process. Just to ask, is anybody going to be tossing the slides up there? I don't want to get too far ahead.
They're up, Eric.
I cannot see them.
Yep.
Let me just try to change things. I'm seeing your screen, Lisa.
We're on the federal fiscal year 25 budget slide.
Just a moment. There I am. Now we're cooking with gas. Thank you for your patience, everybody. So let's talk about the fiscal 25 budget. We've been talking about it for quite a few months now. Congress adjourned for Thanksgiving. They didn't have a final agreement, and they are slated to return today. And this is their final session of the year of the 118th Congress. As I had reported previously, there's about a $90 billion difference in the top line spending numbers that the House and Senate are looking at. That's the first thing that they need to get in place before they can start hammering out bills for the individual or figures for the individual bills that they have to take up. Keep in mind that the House and the Senate differ in their approach on things, but also with the election outcome in November, we also know that there's a different conversation that's taking place internally with both parties in the House and Senate. The members have until December 20th to get something worked out. That's only 3 weeks. And I do not hold out hope for that, quite honestly. And why I say that is if they have not even negotiated that top line spending number that they're going to be working with, it's just a very short turnaround time to actually hammer out those agreements for each of those 12 spending bills, which includes, of course, the T-HUD bill. And I think what we're looking at is the possibility of another continuing resolution, which we know are not healthy. When there's a continuing resolution, it's actually a net loss for us. So every time it's just kicked it down the road, it's shaving resources off of what we have available to serve people in our communities. If indeed a continuing resolution is pursued, it would probably extend out until February or March. But there needs to be action taken by the end of April. That's kind of a magic date. If they are not able to come up with a budget by April 25th, then we look at what's called sequestration. For those of you who are around and can remember, during the Obama administration, there was a deal made with respect to the debt cap. And as part of that, there was a mechanism put in place to have across the board cuts take place to both defense and domestic programming. So that is possible. Do I think that that would happen? Probably not as likely, but you just do not know what's going to be happening come January as the new administration comes in. Next slide, please. So with all that, this is the call to action. I'm going to flip this once again on the screen. It's something we've been putting up for the last several months. And I am asking each of you, if you've done something in the past, please follow up on it now. If you've not done it in the past, I really want you to seriously consider carving out a few minutes here. It doesn't take a lot of time, but reaching out to your member or members of Congress and sharing these priorities with their staff. It's really important here for you to be talking about these priorities. We have a collective voice nationally, and these are things that we think are extremely important, and we want to see them included in a budget this year. The fiscal year 26 budget, all bets may be off. And if we read the tea leaves, and I'll refer to that in a little bit, there may be some attacks on the HUD budget going forward. So we need to put the, stake our flag now and try to get as much funding as possible to shore up our HUD budget. So it's really imperative for you to be reaching out here and being the squeaky wheel. We do have some information we'll be sending out in some follow-up materials that have links for you to be able to access this information more easily for you to be able to contact your member of Congress. I really encourage you to carve out, again, just a few minutes. This doesn't take you an hour to do. It's pretty light lifting, quite honestly, and it can be very impactful. So please, please, please reach out to your members of Congress. Next slide, please. Here are some other tools, just as a reminder to make your voice heard. We're going to share this information in the links as well so that you can think in terms of how you communicate and how the elected officials and their staff members see and hear the priorities that you are sharing with them. Next slide, please. Here we go, forecasting 2025. This is a big teaser here. Stay tuned for next month's meeting. What I want to do is present to you next month at our next meeting. Again, reading the tea leaves. What are we anticipating may be happening in the next year or next 4 years? This is directly related to an assessment of what was attempted in the Trump administration's first 4 years, things that they had proposed that were pushed back on, that we anticipate they're going to be reintroducing, some of the buzz throughout the campaign of actions that would be taken.
No, I mean, I do, but I don't
Got it.
feel like.
We can have everybody just put themselves on mute. We appreciate that. Sorry about that. A little bit of background makes it hard for everybody to hear. So thanks for assisting us with that. So we want to lay out some things for you to be having a little more awareness of what is going to go on in the upcoming 4 years. And we want to give you the tools and kind of wrap your heads around how you need to be as an organization and a community preparing for what is ahead. So please join us next month. We're going to have a lot of stuff for you to be chewing on and thinking about, wrapping your head around. Next slide. On a more positive note, the National Low Income Housing Coalition Policy Forum is taking place March 24th through the 27th. We talked about it at the last meeting. Just making a plug for it again. It's a really great policy forum, but tied to that is a Capitol Hill Day, and we're going to be co-captaining that again in the upcoming year, and would love to see additional folks from Michigan attending. So please think in terms of coming to the forum and participating, carving out time to go on visits on that last day, the 27th. Or you could just come in, fly out. If you don't want to participate in the forum, you can come just to participate in those congressional visits. I really encourage you to engage in this process. So just leaving you with that as well as an action step, call to action. I think that may be my last slide. Moving on to state updates, and Lisa, it's all yours.
Thanks, Eric. Yes. Appreciate that information. Yeah, it's really imperative if you can take a couple minutes out of your time. And we have other things for you to take action on as well. So let's go to the next slide, please. I want to talk about the lame duck session, and I will turn it over to Ashley Heidenrich, who's on our policy team, a fabulous member of ours.
Yeah, I decided.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ashley and a member of our policy team here, and I'm really excited to talk to you about our state updates and the last month of our legislative session here in Michigan. So this December, we're now entering, well, we've already been in the beginning of our session now, but our lame duck session for 2024. So our legislative sessions here in Michigan are 2 years long. So in 2023 and 2024, we've been in one legislative session, and this is the last month. So we have a really urgent need for advocacy now. This is the last month to see any of the bills that have been introduced in the past 2 years pass. So we've seen over 100 housing and homelessness related pieces of legislation be introduced, which really is in large part to all of our collective advocacy. We've seen more housing and homelessness legislation introduced in Michigan than ever before. And we're really close to the finish line with a couple pieces of legislation. So this is really now the time for all of us to come together and take action in the lame duck session. So I'll be telling you all a little bit more about what we've been doing this session, some of the things that we've been hearing, and I'll have a couple ways for you all to take action right now. So we have only 8 session days left on the calendar in December. The legislators will be taking some time off for the holidays and won't be meeting every day. But these 8 session days are expected to be very productive. There's lots of committee meetings that have been added to the calendar, and we expect some of these last session days to maybe even run through the night and see our legislators voting on a lot of bills. I will mention that the lame duck session in Michigan, and any lame duck session really is very unpredictable. There's many last minute bills that can pass, and especially since the elections have already happened, this is the time for members to pass pieces of legislation that may have been a bit more controversial or that they were waiting to pass until the elections were over. And one more thing I'll talk about with the lame duck session is that our advocacy is really urgent right now. The House currently still has that Democrat majority until the end of December. The Senate also has a Democrat majority and will continue to have a majority next year. However, next year the House is going to flip and we'll have a Republican majority. So our advocacy and the type of bills that we're able to pass are going to look a little bit different. So right now, it's really important that all of the legislators hear our voices and are able to pass a couple pieces of really important housing legislation that we've all been working hard at the past 2 years. So I'll mention some of our top policy priorities. We've been running a campaign called the Housing Homestretch because we only have had a few months left to pass all of our housing related legislation. So the first thing on our legislative agenda and the piece of legislation that's the closest to the finish line and very near and dear to all of our hearts here at MICA is source of income protections. And so this will protect against discrimination in the rental application process for individuals who are using legal sources of income that could include housing vouchers, disability benefits, social security benefits, just legal sources of income that aren't traditional earned income. And this will apply to buildings and landlords that have 5 units or more. So there was that compromise made. I'll talk a little bit less in detail about the rest of these, but we're also advocating for eviction, expungement, and sealing. This bill is very important. It will seal eviction records that don't go to a judgment. And 1 in 6 Michiganders has had an eviction filed against them. But if that eviction doesn't go to a judgment, it stays on a tenant's record for their entire lifetime, even if they aren't formally evicted. So this bill will take a really important step in solving this issue. Evictions that do go to a judgment will be expunged after 3 years as well. We also have tenants' rights bills, including the right to organize and the right to repair units. We have the Fair Chance Access to Housing bill, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. We have regulation on manufactured housing to help improve safety and to regulate high rental increases at manufactured housing developments. We have rental junk fee regulation. So that would, for the first time in Michigan, regulate the range of fees that landlords can charge outside of a security deposit. So that includes application fees, move-in fees, pet fees, convenience fees, any of the things that we've all been seeing really increase rapidly in the past few years. The Tenants' Right to Counsel bill will set up a program to provide tenants right to legal counsel for free in the case of an eviction. We have regulation on the application process and the use of credit score. And finally, we have just cause eviction or right to renew, which gives tenants in good standing the first chance to have a right to renew their lease. And I'll just also mention that we chose these 9 bills out of, again, the over 100 really important housing and homelessness related pieces of legislation because these are all very strong and effective bills and they're close to the finish line. They have strong champions attached to them that are sponsoring these bills, and many of them have already received committee hearings or votes. So these are things that are close to the finish line and that we see as a possibility to be passing before the end of December. So now I'm going to talk about a few ways you can take action on all of these important bills. I'm going to put two things in the chat. So if you have a few minutes after this meeting or right now as I'm talking, I would really recommend that you do two things to help these bills reach the finish line. First, I want you all to urge your representatives and senators to support these housing homestretch bills. So the 9 priorities that I just talked about, we have a link where if you input your address, it will automatically send an email to both your state senator and representative. You can customize the message if you want and read it. And if you feel comfortable to send that out, we really recommend that. And that'll be a process that will take you 2 to 3 minutes and will be really impactful. Our representatives really need to hear from us on these bills. They only have 1 month left to pass a whole host of bills, so there's a lot on their plate, a lot of distractions with the election and all of the bills that they're trying to pass. So we need to really be raising our voices and pestering them as much as we can to remind them that these housing homestretch bills are of vital importance to pass in the next month. I will also encourage all of you to send an email to Senate Majority Leader Brinks to bring source of income to the floor. Source of income protections have already passed the full House and Senate. However, there were some technical changes that needed to be made, so it just has to come to the floor for one more Senate vote. This is something that we anticipate happening. However, we just really want to make sure that source of income is a top priority for Senator Brinks and the Senate agenda, and that that's not something that gets lost or forgotten in the next month. So if all of you can send an email to Senator Brinks and urge her to bring source of income for a floor vote, this would be a very quick process, and it's something that already has demonstrated support of all of the Democrats in the House and Senate. And time is of the essence here. If you have been a really active advocate in housing and homelessness for the past 2 years, this is your chance to really continue to finish the job that you've been doing. And if you haven't advocated before, if you've been following along on this process and you've been waiting for your first time to get involved, this is really the perfect time to make a really big impact. Just a couple quick messages, really can't be understated. All of our voices are really needed right here. One last thing that I'll talk about, we have a couple exciting hearings coming up this week. So in committee this week in Lansing on Thursday, December 5th from 10:30 to 11:30, the Fair Chance Access to Housing Bill, as well as the House version of eviction expungement are going to be heard in committee. These are open to the public and all are encouraged to attend and write a card of support, or even speak and offer some brief public testimony, 3 minutes or shorter, to support these crucial bills. The Fair Chance Access to Housing is a very important bill that will reform how individuals with criminal histories are treated in the rental application process. Currently, landlords can look at an individual's lifetime criminal history of any criminal charge and evaluate that when they're being assessed for a rental property. This bill would limit the look back period to 3 years and would also reform the application process so that a criminal history isn't the only reason that a tenant can be rejected from housing. And this is important as 2 million Michiganders have some form of criminal history. And in order to have communities that are safe and healthy for everyone, everyone has the right to be housed regardless of their criminal history. And then again, eviction expungement, I talked a little bit about that earlier, but that's the process to expunge eviction records that haven't gone all the way to a judgment or expunge records after 3 years. I will say in regards to the House version of eviction expungement, there's 2 versions of this bill, one in the Senate and one in the House. We support both bills, however, the House version is a little bit weaker, and that's the one being heard. So we're in active talks with both House and Senate members to hopefully push the Senate bill through. But if the House is looking most likely, we still feel that this is something that will be very important and helpful to pass. So we do support both of these bills, and if you're in Lansing or able to be in the area, we are anticipating this room is going to be packed, especially with advocates of the fair chance access to housing. So this will be a great opportunity to make your voice heard. If you're not comfortable speaking, just to have more folks in the room to show our support for both of these bills is really, really important. And it should be a great day to see a lot of our fellow advocates. I think a lot of people will be at both of these hearings. There's one more hearing that is tomorrow, Tuesday, December 3rd at 9 a.m. in the House Office Building. You can also watch a live stream online, and we'll be attaching the link. In this committee hearing, they will be hearing Representative Grant's housing package, which is related to zoning reform, as well as Senator Anthony's bill that will mandate that security deposits can be returned online. Currently, I think security deposits can only be returned by checks in the mail. So this will make the process a bit easier. The zoning reform package is something that's very important in order to ease some regulations in order to make the development of affordable housing a bit easier in Michigan. So this will reform parking regulations. There's regulations that say there has to be, I believe, 1.5 parking spots for each apartment unit, which takes up some valuable space that could be used for housing. So it'll lower those requirements. This bill will also allow duplexes to be built in single-family zoned areas, and it will also reform the petition process when affordable housing is going to be built. So I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with the term NIMBYism, but often in hearings for new developments, there's petitions against a new development, often from individuals far outside the area of reach. So this will reform the petition process so that only individuals who live near a new development will be able to petition against the development. And they will also have to provide a solid and reasonable reason for why the development will have a negative impact on them personally. And so again, all are encouraged to attend and write a card of support or to speak in support of these really crucial bills. So I will pass it off to Lisa, but thank you all, and please consider taking action, whether it's attending one of these hearings or sending an email to your legislator. Now is the time to act if you've been waiting. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley, and thanks everyone for your questions. I hope we answered everything. Kind of been a flurry, so feel free if you aren't exactly sure, we can clarify, but as Ashley said, the time is now. If you've been waiting on the sidelines to act, this is your sign. Do it now. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And we've heard from legislators that they really do listen when people take the time to email or call or attend, you know, if you're in Lansing and you can attend the committee hearing. So really appreciate it. Can we share the live stream? I think it was shared earlier, but Lauren, if you can grab that for the, or maybe it was Thursdays. Okay, Lauren, thank you for the House calendar for the committee hearing. Yeah, it's, you can watch it. You can also email the clerk for the respective committee and say, I'd like to offer a card of support, or you can say, I oppose this bill, whatever, give the bill number and send an email, and that way they read it at the end, all of the cards of support. So it's really, it's critical that if you can't be there in person, that you do that, as well as contacting your member. So just wanted to let you know about the Housing Homestretch rally that we held as part of the Housing Homestretch campaign. We were all together in Lansing on November 13th. It was a great day. The legislature was in session that day. They had committee hearings, and we saw lots of legislators coming out. We had a gathering in the beginning where we heard from tenants and people with lived experience about how each of the bills that we're prioritizing, those 9 bills that Ashley mentioned, how they, you know, would affect their experience and their lives and ease their access into housing. So it was really impactful. And then we ate lunch and then walked over to the actual Capitol building in the rotunda. You can see some of the photos there. We had people on different levels circling around and chanting. You can't have signs in the Capitol, but they did have one that kind of like a banner that said renters' rights. We had about 225 people come from many corners of Michigan, all the way up to Traverse City and all the way down to the very, the line. I will say that we made a lot of noise, and I know that people took notice, and legislators were out there taking pictures. We didn't demonstrate that we took a picture on the steps. You can see they put up a really clever banner that said 30 days notice. So it was really super great. This was in concert with our partners, We the People and Detroit Action, as well as Rent is Too Damn High Coalition. And many of you, we saw many of you there. So really appreciate it. Lastly, we also did an action where everyone wrote a sticky note with their hopes for the rest of the legislative session, the lame duck session. So some people wrote, pass this bill or take action, and we put them on speaker tapes. And Senator Majority Leader Winnie Brinks's doors in the Capitol to let them know that we were all hoping that they would take action. So thank you for everyone that came, and I hope you continue to take action the rest of this year. It could be frenetic. There wasn't a lot of action after our rally. I know that some legislators didn't show up for some meetings and hearings, but we think things are back in full force now, and we're really looking forward to a good couple weeks of action. The 8 days concludes the sessions, and they don't have to hold all the sessions. They have 8 on the calendar, but I believe the 18th is the last day of session before the holidays. Next slide, please. Also wanted to let you know about a letter that was written by the Campaign to End Homelessness, as well as the Michigan Interagency Council. Every year we come together, we have an ad hoc committee that talks about some of the things that we need to end homelessness and increase housing assets. And a lot of these priorities make their way into what ends up being our letter. So we just finalized the letter at the end of October and sent it out to the governor's executive office. Some of the things that you see here are some of the priorities that made it to the letter. And so this is for the budget appropriations process that has already started. The new budget won't start until October of 25, but the process now has started for different state departments to put their budgets together, to our legislators who are chairing all of the appropriations committees, meeting with different stakeholders and advocates and partners to talk about what's really important. And so if you can, Lauren put the link in the chat. You can see more detail in the letter and what we're asking for, but some really crucial things like emergency rental assistance, $30 million, increasing services for persons that are in permanent supportive housing, a gap financing fund. As we know, permanent supportive housing takes many layers of funding to put together, some systems transformation advocates that will do DEI work, as well as SOAR, more money for SOAR workers, and expansion of all kinds of interim housing, shelter, street outreach, as well as shelter actual physical improvements. So it's really critical. Next slide. So if you can advocate for those two, and stay tuned, we will be keeping you up to date on the appropriations process as the new year gets underway. Just wanted to let you know that these were our 2024 policy priorities, and many of you have completed our survey to help inform our 2025 policy priorities. We had 48 people who filled out our survey. We've sent it out to our board as well, and give you one last chance to do it here because we will be wrapping that up by Thursday. So if you have any thoughts for things that you'd like us to include, we'd be open to that. So our January LAC meeting, as well as hearing from Eric on the federal priorities, we will be talking about our MICA policy priorities as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Just a few updates in the remaining 10 minutes. Really quickly, we have two trainings coming up in December. We have one in-paid training in Macomb County for motivational interviewing that is going to be Friday, December 13th. And we also have our monthly free training that's going to be around privacy and why informed consent matters when it comes to data sharing. And that would be a really interesting one by our own Jerry Leslie, who's Micah's Director of Data Initiatives. So that should be a really interesting training, and it's free. So thanks, Lauren. Lauren's posted the links in the chat, and you can take advantage of that because sometimes December tends to be a little bit slow. So you can take advantage of those trainings. Next slide, please. Just one more thing to put on your calendar for next year as you turn the page to 2025. We're having our Advocacy Day, April 9th. It's a Wednesday at Lansing Community College, and we'll have a lot more coming up in the future. All different kinds of things about appointments that we're making, speakers. We're having a shuttle bus this year, so make it easier for people to get around the Capitol area. So we hope you can join us. So this is the part where you come in. We'd love to hear from some of you if you have things going on in your community, whether it's end of year things, drives, warming centers, interim shelter, whatever's going on. This is the time for you to weigh in. So I'll be quiet and see if anyone wants to weigh in. No one? All right, well, if you don't feel comfortable unmuting, you can put it in the chat. Or if you had something that you did for HAM, Homeless Awareness Month, I know a lot of us attended many of the events that you had in your community. You had just some wonderful events. So thank you. I was in Washtenaw, I was in Macomb. I know our staff went around the state as well. All right, why don't we go to the next slide? Oh, I have a typo there. Our next meeting is January 6th. That is the first Monday of the month. So we will be sending out new links. We are going to refresh our links for January. Still have to register again. So we appreciate it if you will do that. Just helps for security reasons to redo the link every so often. So we will be sending that out to you. So please look in your inbox for that. And next slide, please. You can catch us on social media. There's a lot of ways that you can reach out to us. Our website is being redone. We have Amy and Ashley and a lot of our staff are redoing it. And so one thing I will also preview that we'll be talking about in January, we have a new legislative tracker tool that is amazing and makes it much easier for us to track legislation, both federal and state, as well as for you, an advocate, to just write off a quick email. It has a lot of templates in there. So really easy way to complete advocacy. I see the note in the chat about the April 9th week being spring break. It is so hard to pick a time during that time frame, with colleges being out earlier and schools being out later and looking at the legislative calendar. So I do appreciate that. And I'm sorry if it conflicts for some of you. Bring your kids. It'd be great to have some kids with us. But, you know, do what you can. And we will be there on April 9th. A lot of organizations schedule it, you know, earlier in the year, earlier in the spring to try and catch legislators. So not a lot of flexibility there, but we did our best. Any other thoughts or comments as we thank you everyone for sending out those legislative emails right now. Thank you all for coming. We really appreciate all of you, and we couldn't do it without all of you. So it takes all of us to do this advocacy and to really keep an eye out for what's going on and it's a busy time of year with everyone trying to get together for the holidays, but this lame duck session could be really meaningful. So please stay tuned. Thank you all. Have a happy and healthy rest of the year, and we look forward to seeing you in January. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Take action.
Bye.